In the dark and treacherous world of medieval Italy, a war raged that was more twisted and complex than any modern video game. Imagine a web of alliances and enemies so tangled, it made the plot of a soap opera look simple. This was the world of the Visconti and the Papal States, where lords, knights, and mercenaries fought not just for land and power, but for their own survival in a game where loyalty was a luxury no one could afford. In the heart of this chaos stood Enguerrand de Coucy, a French nobleman who found himself caught in the middle of a conflict that seemed endless and senseless. The year was 1372, and the place was Lombardy, a region in northern Italy. The war was a messy affair, with no clear winners or losers, and alliances shifting as quickly as the wind. The fighting was often more about personal grudges and family ties than any noble cause. The main players in this drama were the Visconti brothers, Bernabo and Galeazzo, who were fighting against the Pope and his allies, including the Duke of Savoy, Amadeus, and the French nobleman Enguerrand de Coucy. The Visconti were powerful lords who ruled Milan, and the Pope, Gregory XI, was determined to bring them to heel. But the war was complicated by a web of relationships that went beyond just politics. Bernabo and Galeazzo were connected by marriage to the Duke of Savoy, and even the Pope had his own family ties that influenced his decisions. One of the most famous mercenaries in this war was Sir John Hawkwood, an English knight known for his prowess and his willingness to change sides for the right price. Hawkwood started out working for Bernabo, but quickly switched to the Pope's side when the pay was better. The mercenary system of the time meant that loyalty was a rare commodity. These soldiers of fortune would fight for whoever paid them the most, and their presence made the war even more unpredictable. The fighting itself was often more about show than substance. The battles were less about winning and more about making a statement. For example, the siege of Asti in 1372 was a prime example of this. The city was a key strategic point, and both sides wanted to control it. Enguerrand de Coucy and his forces faced off against Sir John Hawkwood's White Company, a group of mercenaries known for their gleaming armor and terrifying appearance. But the real reason the siege failed was not because of the bravery of the defenders or the skill of the attackers. It was because of the interference of Gian Galeazzo, the 21-year-old son of Galeazzo Visconti. Gian Galeazzo was a young and inexperienced leader, and his father, Galeazzo, was so worried about his safety that he sent 2 guardians to keep him from being killed or captured. These guardians, acting on orders from Galeazzo, prevented Hawkwood from launching a frontal assault, which he believed was necessary to take the city. Frustrated, Hawkwood packed up and left, and the city was eventually relieved by the Savoyard forces. This series of events highlighted the absurdity of the war, where personal concerns often took precedence over military strategy. The war also had its fair share of bizarre and tragic moments. For example, Gian Galeazzo's wife, Isabel of France, died in childbirth in 1373, leaving him a widower and a father to 3 young children. The death of his wife and the loss of their 4th child, who survived only 7 months, must have been a devastating blow to the young lord. But even in the midst of personal tragedy, the war continued, and Gian Galeazzo had to return to his duties. Enguerrand de Coucy, despite his initial setbacks, continued to play a crucial role in the conflict. The Pope, recognizing Coucy's value, appointed him Captain General of the Papal forces in Lombardy. Coucy was tasked with joining forces with Hawkwood and Amadeus, the Duke of Savoy, to create a pincer movement that would encircle and crush the Visconti forces. However, the plan was complicated by the unpredictable nature of the war. The Pope, for example, suddenly ordered Coucy to provide a safe conduct for the Visconti brothers to appear before him in Avignon. This move, which was intended to bring the war to a peaceful conclusion, backfired when the Visconti used it as a delaying tactic to gather more forces. The Battle of Montichiari in 1373 was a turning point in the war. Coucy and Hawkwood, despite being vastly outnumbered, managed to defeat Gian Galeazzo's forces in a stunning upset. The victory was a mix of Coucy's reckless charge and Hawkwood's timely intervention. The battle was brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses, but in the end, the papal forces emerged victorious. The Pope declared the victory a miracle, and news of it spread quickly, boosting Coucy's reputation. However, the victory at Montichiari did not lead to the decisive end of the war, that the Pope had hoped for. The papal forces, now bloodied and depleted, were unable to join up with Amadeus, and the offensive stalled. The war dragged on, with both sides growing weary and the Pope's treasury running low. Coucy, seeing little future in the conflict, requested leave to return to France. The Pope, recognizing Coucy's value, granted his request with a flood of compliments and promises of future payment. The war finally came to an end in 1374, but not because of a decisive battle or a grand peace treaty. Instead, it was the recurrence of the Black Death that brought the fighting to a halt. The plague swept through Italy and southern France, forcing many of the combatants to focus on survival rather than war. Bernabo, enraged by the reconciliation between his brother and the Duke of Savoy, attempted to assassinate his sister-in-law, Blanche, but the plot failed. Bernabo eventually made peace with the Pope, but the terms were favorable to him, and the war had accomplished little. For Gian Galeazzo, the war was a defining moment. His second defeat at Montichiari marked the end of his military career. He never again took command of troops in battle, choosing instead to focus on his role as a statesman. Despite his skill in statecraft, Gian Galeazzo remained a melancholic figure, haunted by personal tragedies and the knowledge that his rise to power had been built on a foundation of trickery and violence. The war in Lombardy was a microcosm of the larger conflicts that plagued medieval Europe. It was a time when loyalty was a rare commodity, and the lines between friend and foe were constantly blurred. For Enguerrand de Coucy, the experience was both a test of his courage and a lesson in the complexities of war. The conflict in Lombardy may have been a sideshow in the larger scheme of history, but for those who lived through it, it was a brutal and unforgettable chapter in their lives.